The wind had already picked up the desert dust when Billy the Kid stepped off the boardwalk. One hand adjusting the brim of his hat, the other resting near the butt of his Colt. He had a mind to be gone from that crooked little town before anyone recognized the narrow-shouldered boy with the lazy grin as the most hunted outlaw in the New Mexico territory. His horse waited at the hitching post, ears flicking as if it too could smell trouble coming. He had one boot in the stirrup when he heard it. A thin, breaking cry that didn't belong to the wind at all. "Mister! Mister! Please!" Billy turned, instinctively checking the rooftops and alleys first, not the street, out of sheer habit. Then he saw her, a little girl in a faded blue dress, stockings, dirty with street dust, black hair in loose braids. Tears carving pale lines down her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 8. She skidded to a stop in front of him, small chest heaving. "They're hurting my mama," she gasped. "The bad men. They're gonna kill her." Billy's grip tightened on the saddle horn. "Slow down, Niña," he said, the old New Mexico Spanish slipping out without him thinking. "Who's your mama?" The girl scrubbed at her eyes with the back of her hand. Rosa Alvarez. She owns the Cantina del Sol. They came back, 5 of them. Mama told me to run. Please, mister, they're gonna take the bar and..." Her voice cracked into sobs. Cantina del Sol. Billy felt something shift in his chest, like someone nudging an old bruise. He remembered the place. A month back, he'd ridden through dry and tired, pockets almost empty, lungs full of trail dust. She'd been behind the bar then, dark eyes steady, long black hair braided down her back, moving with the grace of a woman who was used to being watched and refused to be owned by any gaze. 32, maybe. But the kind of 32 that wore its years like jewelry, soft at the edges, strong in the center. She'd called him Chico Peligroso, with a half smile when she caught him watching the door and the mirrors more than his whiskey. He hadn't forgotten. He had meant to ride away from this town without leaving footprints deeper than a horseshoe print in dust. The kid knew better than to linger any place where law and greed had already made their bed together. But the girl's eyes were too much like eyes he had seen once in a smoky room back east, before his mother coughed herself right into the silence. He swallowed hard, cursing the small, stubborn piece of himself that still reacted to crying children. "All right," he said. "Stay by my horse. If anyone comes near you, you run around the back of the livery, and you don't stop till you're out of town. You hear?" She nodded, desperate, clutching at his dusty sleeve. "Will you save her?" Billy managed a crooked grin he didn't feel. "I can be real persuasive when I have to be." He turned away before the girl could see his face sober again, then strode back up the boardwalk, boots loud against the warped planks, past a pair of townsfolk who suddenly found the sky interesting when his eyes met theirs. The Cantina del Sol sat on the corner where the stage road met the future. At least that's what the speculative men called the surveyed line, where the railroad might one day run. When Billy pushed through the batwing doors, the scene inside froze him for a breath. Rosa stood near the bar, her long black hair loose and wild around her shoulders, lips split, blood tracing a fierce line from the corner of her mouth to her chin. One sleeve of her dark red dress was torn, exposing a strong brown shoulder mottled with a fresh bruise. One man had her wrists pinned behind her back, another held a knife loosely in his hand, the blade catching a thin stripe of late afternoon light. 3 others lounged nearby with the sloppy arrogance of men who had already decided the outcome. "I said sign the paper, Rosa," the knife holder drawled. He was tall, mustache oiled and curled, coat too fine for a simple hired thug. "I don't like laying hands on ladies, cuts into my appetite." "Then you must be starving," Rosa spat, even with split lips. Her voice was hoarse but unbroken. "I told you, I'm not selling." The man raised the back of his hand, but the motion never landed. Billy's Colt was already out, the barrel steady as a church promise. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, voice calm enough to make one of the card players in the corner flinch. "I don't see roses on any of your hands, So I'm gonna guess none of you owns this place." The room shifted around him. The man pinning Rosa stiffened. The one with the knife looked slowly over his shoulder, eyes narrowing as he took in the slim young stranger in the doorway. "This is a private matter, amigo," the mustached man said. "Walk away." Billy smiled, bright and careless. The way he'd learned made men underestimate the boy behind the pistol. "You see, that's the trouble. I keep trying to walk away from trouble, and trouble keeps dragging me back by the boot heel." Rosa's gaze locked on his, something like surprise flickering through the pain. "You," she whispered. "You came back." "Didn't plan to," he said, without looking at her. "But I'm easily swayed by good whiskey and bad manners." The man with the knife finally recognized the shape of the famous grin, the easy stance that was all wrong for someone with a gun leveled and unshaking. His eyes darkened. "Hell," he muttered. "Boys, that's Billy the damn kid." The air thickened, chairs scraped. Somewhere, a glass clinked against the floor. Billy saw their hands twitch toward belts and holsters in the slow, doomed way of men who thought speed lived in their fingers and not in the part of the brain that decided, without thinking, whether to kill. "Here's how this goes," Billy said. "Let the lady go, put the knife down, back away from the bar, and out that door. You tell whoever sent you that Rosa Alvarez ain't for sale, and if he wants to argue about it, he can send a preacher and meet me himself." He paused, head tilting with mock curiosity. "Or we can skip to the part where the undertaker makes more money than your boss. In another town, with other men, maybe that would have been enough. But these five were already drunk on the authority of the man behind them. A man whose money greased the hinges of half the doors in town." The knife man barked a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You have no idea who you're crossing, boy." Billy's gaze cooled. "No," he said softly. "It's you who doesn't." Everything that happened next squeezed into less than a heartbeat. The knife man lunged, thinking youth would make the outlaw reckless. Billy's gun roared once, the shot so close to Rosa's head that she felt the heat of it pass, and the knife man flew backward, crashing into a table, a neat hole opening in the center of his vest. The man holding Rosa flinched just enough for her to twist, slamming her heel down on his instep. He howled, grip loosening, and she drove her elbow back into his ribs with a crack. Billy pivoted, gun already tracking, and another man's pistol cleared leather just in time to bark a shot wild into the ceiling, before Billy's bullet took him in the shoulder and spun him into a row of liquor bottles. Glass exploded, whiskey spraying like a brief, sad rain. The remaining two men dove for cover behind an overturned table, firing blindly. Splinters flew. Rosa dropped to the floor and crawled behind the bar, blood dripping onto the wood. Billy moved with a fluid, almost playful economy, stepping sideways, shooting once, twice. One thug screamed and clutched his leg. The other felt his hat ripped clean off his head by a bullet that might have been a warning or a near miss, depending on how much mercy Billy had left in him that afternoon. Silence fell in chunks, punctuated by the groan of the wounded and the thin whimper of a terrified drunk under a nearby table. Billy stood in the center of the room, chest rising and falling, the smell of burned powder hanging like an accusation in the air. Slowly, he lowered the gun. "I told you I was persuasive," he said. The man with the shot-up leg glared from the floor, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're dead, kid," he hissed. "Mr. Coulter will skin you. This town belongs to him. This bar belongs to him. He's already paid good money for it." Billy cocked his head. "Then he ought to ask for his money back," he said. "On account of him buying what ain't his." He kicked the man's gun out of reach. "Now you two crawl out of here before I change my mind. You tell Mr. Coulter that Rosa's got friends. Dangerous ones." The man spat blood toward Billy's boots, but started dragging himself toward the door, the uninjured accomplice helping him, stumbling. They staggered out into the fading light. Through the swinging doors, Billy heard mutters, footsteps scurrying away. Just like that, the town knew. He holstered his Colt and turned toward the bar. Rosa rose slowly from behind it, one hand pressed to her ribs, eyes fixed on him, dark and bright at once. Her lip was swollen, a bruise blooming on her cheek, but there was nothing broken in her gaze. "You stupid beautiful boy," she said softly in Spanish. "Do you know what you just did?" Billy shrugged, trying to lighten the air that seemed to weigh more with every second. "Saved your bar, you can repay me with whiskey." He moved around the counter, looking her over quickly, gaze suddenly professional, checking for deeper wounds. She slapped his hand away when he got too close to the torn sleeve, but the touch was more embarrassed than angry. "I didn't ask you to save me," she said. "I told Anna to run so she wouldn't see this." Her eyes flicked toward the door. "She found you instead." "She did good," Billy said. "For the record, I don't usually take orders from children." But she cried real pretty. Rosa almost smiled. "That's my daughter. She thinks the world can still be fixed if you just ask the right stranger." Her gaze softened, then sharpened again. "These men won't stop, Billy. You should have kept writing." "I hear that a lot." He reached for a clean rag on the counter, wet it with water from the pitcher. "Hold still." She did, just long enough for him to dab gently at the blood on her lip. Up close, he could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, carved by sun and laughter and worry, none of them making her less beautiful. If anything, they made her more dangerous. "Who's Coulter?" he asked. "And why does he want this place bad enough to send 5 idiots to ruin my afternoon?" Rosa's jaw tightened. "Elias Coulter is a businessman," she said, spitting the word out as if it tasted of rust. "He owns half the freight wagons that pass through this town, a quarter of the cattle, and 3/4 of the men who pretend to uphold the law. The sheriff swears by the Bible on Sunday, and by Coulter's gold the rest of the week." "Sounds like a real delight," Billy said. "But what is it about this bar? Ain't there enough whiskey joints in New Mexico already?" Rosa's eyes drifted past him, toward the front windows, as if she could see through the warped glass to the dusty street, to the survey stakes pounded into the hard ground beyond. "You see those marker posts out there?" she asked. "The ones with the red flags? Hard to miss 'em. They're ruining the view." "That's where the railmen say the tracks will run," she said. "Maybe next year, maybe the one after. The eastbound trains will stop just there, where my bar stands on the corner. Coulter has a man inside the company. He knows the timetable, the plans, before any of us. He wants to turn this cantina into a grand gambling hall and hotel. The first thing men see when they step off the train. Cards, girls, liquor watered down and sold at city prices. He'll bleed cowboys, miners, soldiers, travelers. Half their wages will end up in his pockets before they even get a room for the night." Billy let out a low whistle. "And owning the bar means owning the crossroads." Rosa nodded. "Men like Coulter don't care about the bar itself. They care about where it sits and what will pass through it. He's been buying up land all along the future tracks. Every board, every nail in this town. He wants them all under his thumb, and anyone who says no." Her gaze dropped briefly to the broken glass and the blood on her floor. "Well, you saw. So why haven't you sold?" he asked, quietly. "Most folks would have taken his money and moved on." She met his eyes again, and he saw something there like stubborn pride braided with old hurt. "My father built this cantina when this town was nothing but sand and a promise," she said. "He died serving drinks to men who never learned his name. I cleaned floors here when I was no taller than that bar stool. I buried my mother last winter in that scrubby little cemetery on the hill. This is the only thing that's mine, Billy. I won't hand it over to a man who thinks he can buy everything just because no one has ever told him, no loud enough." He understood that, more than he wanted to admit. There was a piece of him that still believed in holding a line, even when that line was made of nothing but stubbornness and old memories. "So Coulter sends hired fists," Billy said. "He that's scared of you." A shadow crossed Rosa's face, older than Coulter, older than the railroad, something personal lurking there. "He's not scared of me," she said, bitterly. "He's doing a favor for someone who hates me more than he loves himself." Billy's brows lifted. "And that someone would be my ex-husband," she said. "Caleb Moore. He used to call himself a gambler. What he really gambled was other people's futures." She glanced away, jaw clenched. "He lost every cent he ever touched, every horse, every house. The only thing he didn't lose at a card table was me, because I walked out before he could put me up as collateral. I took Anna and came home. He swore I ruined his life by leaving. Coulter gave him a chance to get even, help him force me out, and Caleb gets a share in the new railroad palace. It's not about the bar for Caleb, it's about watching me crawl. Billy leaned back against the bar, expression unreadable for a moment. He knew men like Caleb. Hell, on his worst days, in the darkest parts of his mind, he knew how close any man could get to that kind of bitterness. You married real well, he said dryly. I was 19, she replied. He had straight teeth and a quick smile, and knew how to dance. That's about all it takes when you're 19 and stupid. She winced as she shifted her weight, one hand flying to her ribs. Instinct overrode his caution. Billy stepped forward, catching her elbow to steady her. Easy, he murmured. Ribs might be bruised. You need to lie down. I need to clean my floor, she shot back. Coulter's men will be back, and I won't have them thinking they scared me into closing. They won't be back tonight, he said. Word that Billy the Kid is in town will reach Coulter before his men do. Men like him don't rush into fights they didn't pick. And you? She asked softly, searching his face. Are you staying? That was the question clawing at the inside of his skull, since he'd pulled the trigger. Billy knew the smart move. Hell, the only move usually was to get on his horse and ride until this town was a smear behind him. His name carried a price, and that price doubled every time someone added another story to it. But the image of Anna's tear-streaked face, of Rosa standing with her dress torn and her spine straight, kept getting between him and the picture of empty, safe horizon. He sighed. For tonight, he said. Maybe a little longer. Her eyes darkened with something he tried not to name. Why? He gave a one-shouldered shrug, trying to pass it off as nothing. Reckon I owe you a drink I never paid for last time I passed through. Rosa's lips curved slowly, despite the bruises. One drink doesn't buy you a war, Billy. What can I say? He answered, the corner of his mouth lifting. I'm bad at math. That night, after the sun sank and the cicadas took up their thin, insistent song, Billy sat at a back table cleaning his gun, while Rosa swept up the broken glass. The cantina was half empty, the regulars, having drifted out early, wary of being caught in whatever storm was forming around the corner of town, and the woman who owned it. Anna slept in a small room above the bar, exhausted from fear and from clinging to her mother, until Rosa finally soothed her with a lullaby that made Billy's chest ache in ways he didn't care to examine. You don't have to stay in the main room, Rosa said at one point, pausing with the broom in her hand, hair falling in waves around her face. There's a little room out back we used to rent to travelers. It's simple, but the door locks. Simple sounds like heaven, Billy said. You sure it's no trouble? If you're here, you may as well be where my eyes can find you, she replied. That way if Coulter's men come back and shoot you, I won't have to walk far to spit on the spot. He laughed, the sound startling him with how easy it came. You talk to all your guests like that? Only the famous outlaws. She hesitated, then added more quietly. They say you've killed many men. They say a lot of things, he said. Some of them are even true. Are you proud of it? He looked down at the gun in his hands, the metal gleaming in the lamplight. No, he admitted, but I'm proud I'm still here. Men tried to take what was mine, tried to put me in a hangman's noose, because it was easier than admitting they were the ones who lit the fire. I did what I had to do. Sometimes, what you have to do stains your hands. She watched him quietly, the broom forgotten. You are younger than I thought you'd be, she said softly. You look like trouble, and a boy at the same time. It's a popular combination, he said. Their eyes held a beat longer than it should have, then another. Something unspoken passed between them, something built of shared stubbornness, and the knowledge that the world didn't leave much room for softness in people like them. Days passed, faster and slower, all at once. Coulter didn't send more men immediately. That wasn't his way. Instead, pressure came in quieter forms. The sheriff stopped by with a folded paper and a frown, mumbling about new city ordinances and overdue taxes. Rosa ripped the paper in half without reading it,
tossing the scraps onto the bar. "Tell Coulter if he wants my signature. He can bring the paper himself," she said coldly. "And tell him to wipe his boots before he comes in." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Billy, who stood in the corner, polishing his rifle. Their gazes met, and something like apology flashed in the lawman's eyes before he looked away. "You're making this hard on everyone, Rosa," he muttered. "Some fights you don't win. Some fights are worth losing," she replied. After the sheriff left, Billy raised a brow. "You know, poking bears for sport isn't generally advised." "I've been married," she said dryly. "This is nothing." At night, when the cantina quieted, and the lamplight turned the rough wood gold, they sat together at the bar, talking in low voices. They spoke of small things at first: weather, trail stories, the kind of harmless boasting that men in dusty hats traded like currency. But slowly, the stories reached deeper. Billy told her about his mother, about Boston streets and New Mexico skies, about the way this land felt like a promise and a threat at the same time. Rosa told him about dances in San Antonio, about a girl with flowers in her hair, who thought a clever smile could fix a man already broken in ways she didn't understand. Somewhere in that talking, they stopped being just outlaw and bar owner, and became something quieter, more dangerous. Two people who knew what it was to lose everything, and choose to keep standing anyway. The first time he touched her without needing an excuse, it was because she laughed too hard at something he said, and winced, hand flying to her ribs. His hand closed over hers, gently, steadying, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist where her pulse stuttered. She looked up, and whatever she saw in his face made the laughter die on her lips. "Ribs still hurt?" he asked, voice lower than before. "Only when I breathe," she whispered. "Then maybe we should both forget to breathe for a while," he said. She could have stepped back. Instead, she stepped closer. Her fingers reached up, tracing the line of his jaw, the faint scar near his ear. "Your trouble, Billy," she murmured. "So I've been told," he replied. He bent his head, and their mouths met, slow at first, as if both were surprised to find themselves here after all the long, hard miles behind them. The world narrowed to the warmth of her lips, the way she tasted faintly of whiskey, and something sweeter beneath it. The lamplight hummed, the night wind whispered against the shutters, and for a little while, the weight of names, outlaw, widow, exile, fell silent. Later, behind the closed door of that small back room, they shed the armor the world had forced onto their shoulders. There was nothing hurried or careless in it. No conquest, no transaction. Just two people who had bled for their survival, finding, in each other's arms, a brief and fragile refuge. He traced the lines of her back like a map to a place he'd never thought he'd be allowed to rest. She buried her face against his neck, and let herself forget, for a night, that men with money and grudges were drawing lines on maps that didn't include her. In the quiet after, tangled in thin sheets that smelled of soap and dust, and faintly of roses from her hair, Rosa lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You'll have to go, you know," she said at last, voice barely audible. Billy stared at the cracked ceiling. "I know. If you stay, they'll hang you. If they don't hang you, they'll shoot you in the back. Either way, it will be because of me. If they hang me, it'll be because I made my own choices on my own 2 feet, he said, "not because of you." She was quiet a long moment. "I want you to stay," she admitted. It was as close to a confession as she'd given anyone in years. He turned his head, pressing his lips to her hair. "I want to," he said. "But wanting and being able, the distance between those two is wider than this desert." The end came the way such things often did, not in a single thunderclap, but with the slow build of pressure, until the air itself felt like it might tear. One hot afternoon, a dust cloud appeared on the road outside town, thicker than a freight train, slower than a cavalry column. Men rode out of it in 2s and 3s, too well armed for simple ranch hands, too organized for drifters. Their leader rode at the front, on a glossy bay horse, Elias Coulter, just as Rosa had described him. His suit coat was dusty but fine, his boots polished, his hair slicked back. Beside him rode another man, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes darting. Caleb Moore. Time had not been kind to him. The once handsome gambler now wore his debts in the sag of his cheeks, the hollows beneath his eyes. His jacket strained at the seams, not from healthy weight, but from the swollen puff of a man who drank more than he slept. When they reined in before the cantina, the town watched from doorways and behind lace curtains. No one spoke. The air hummed with held breath.
Guns barked. Horses reared. Townsfolk dove for cover. Billy moved without thinking, dragging Rosa back behind the doorway as the first volley ripped splinters from the doorframe. He fired twice through the gap, ducked, rolled, came up on one knee by the bar. Rosa snatched the shotgun from beneath the counter, old but well-oiled, and broke it open with practiced hands checking the shells. "Stay down, Anna," she screamed toward the stairs without looking, trusting her daughter to obey. A bullet shattered a bottle inches from her head. Billy shot the man who'd fired it, sending him tumbling from his saddle. The sheriff hesitated in the street, gun half raised, then ducked behind a water trough, firing wild shots that went nowhere near the cantina. Men loyal to Coulter fanned out, taking cover behind hitching posts and wagons, returning fire. Glass rained down. Smoke thickened. Somewhere, someone was crying. Billy felt the old cold focus slide over him, the part of himself that existed only in the space between breaths and bullets. He counted shots, tracked movements, used the gaps between gunfire like stepping stones. Each time he squeezed the trigger, a man fell, or scrambled back, or thought twice. But there were too many of them, and his bullets were not endless. "We can't hold this forever," he shouted, between shots. "Working on forever is your job," Rosa yelled back, pumping the shotgun and firing both barrels in quick succession. One of Coulter's riders flew backward off his horse. The other screamed as buckshot tore into his arm. She ducked down, reloading with deft fingers. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, but her eyes burned bright. Caleb, still on horseback, fired blindly toward the doorway, shouting curses that broke and tangled on his tongue. At some point, the sheriff stood and aimed carefully. Not at Billy, but at the sky, firing twice. "That's enough," he roared. No one listened. Coulter had taken cover behind a wagon, pistol in hand, eyes narrow and calculating. He waited, watching, looking for the moment when the tide would shift decisively in his favor. And then he saw it. Billy's gun clicked on an empty chamber. In that fractional pause, as he reached for the spare cylinder at his belt, one of Coulter's men darted forward along the side of the building, using the blind angle. A shot cracked. Pain lanced through Billy's side, hot and stunning. He stumbled, the world tilting, his back slamming into the bar. Rosa screamed his name. The room went fuzzy at the edges, colors washing into each other. He could feel the warm spread of blood under his shirt. "Billy!" Rosa dropped the shotgun, lunging toward him. He shoved her back toward cover, with more strength than he felt. "Stay down!" he gasped. Outside, Coulter saw it, the stagger, the crimson blooming on the outlaw's shirt, and smiled. "Finish it!" he shouted to Caleb, thrusting his pistol toward the gambler. "You wanted revenge. There it is. Take it." Caleb's hand shook visibly as he took the offered gun. His eyes locked on the doorway, on the man who had interfered, who had stood beside the woman who used to lie in his arms. Jealousy and shame twisted inside him, but under it, something smaller and meaner drove him. The need to prove, if only to himself, that he still mattered. "Rosa!" he called, voice cracking. "Watch this. This is what you chose when you left me. This is the future you picked." He stepped forward, leveling the pistol at the dark gap where Billy had fallen. For a heartbeat, all sound shrank around that single movement. Billy, fighting to stay conscious, saw the shadow shift, the gleam of sunlight on gunmetal. His fingers scrabbled for his fallen colt and found only air. He thought, distantly, that this was as good a place as any to die, a woman worth bleeding for, a town finally ready to remember it had a spine. Rosa saw Caleb's silhouette in the doorway, the angle of his arm, the way his finger tightened on the trigger. Time snapped into sharp focus. In that moment, she saw not her ex-husband, but every compromise she had ever made, every time she had swallowed her own fear to keep his from exploding. She saw Anna upstairs, small and sleeping, trusting her mother to keep the wolves outside. Rosa Alvarez did not think, she moved. Her hand closed around the butt of the dropped shotgun, fingers slick with sweat, and she brought it up in one smooth motion, bracing the stock against her shoulder the way her father had taught her when she was barely old enough to lift the barrel. Caleb's mouth opened, maybe to say her name, maybe to shout another curse. The shotgun roared, a thunderclap in the small room. Caleb jerked backward, surprise frozen on his face as he toppled off the walkway into the dust. Coulter stared, momentarily stunned. The man meant to be his pet blade had just been cut down by the woman he'd hoped to crush. The town, watching from their windows and roofs, saw it too. They saw Rosa standing in the doorway of her bar, smoke curling from the shotgun in her hands, blood on her dress, eyes blazing. And in that instant, something old and quiet inside them, something that remembered a time before Coulter's money ruled their choices, woke up. The blacksmith picked up his hammer. The storekeeper fetched the rifle he kept under the counter. A ranch hand reached for the shotgun over the mantel. One by one, doors opened. Men and women stepped into the street, guns and pitchforks and kitchen knives in their hands. "You heard her," the sheriff shouted hoarsely, seizing the moment he'd been too afraid to make. "This town ain't for sale." He turned, leveling his gun, not at Billy, but at Coulter. Coulter looked around, truly looked, for the first time. The calculation in his eyes changed rapidly, weighing odds that had just shifted under his feet. What had been a simple show of force had turned, in the space of one woman's shot, into something ugly and uncertain. He saw it, the thin line between owning a town and being lynched by it. "We're done here," he snapped. "Mount up." His men hesitated, glancing at the bodies in the dust, at the townsfolk, who now, for the first time in too long, outnumbered them. Then survival won out over loyalty. They hauled themselves onto their horses, wheeled them around. Coulter shot Billy one last, murderous look, then spurred his horse hard. The riders pounded out of town in a cloud of dust, leaving behind silence, broken glass, and the bitter tang of burned powder. Slowly, the tension leaked out of the air. Guns lowered. Voices rose in a low, disbelieving murmur. The sheriff sagged against the water trough, shaking. "You all right, kid?" he called toward the bar. Billy slid down to the floor, hand pressed to his side, his smile crooked and thin. "Been better," he managed. "That bastard winged me." Rosa was on him in an instant, dropping to her knees, hands hovering. "Let me see," she demanded. "You're bleeding like a stuck pig." "I've seen stuck pigs," he wheezed. "I'm prettier." Despite everything, she huffed a laugh, tears brightening her eyes. She tore open his shirt, revealing a groove along his ribs, messy but not deep. The bullet had carved a burning path, but it hadn't gone in. "You're lucky," she muttered. "Maybe God likes you after all." "That seems unlikely," he said. "But I'll take it." She fetched water and clean cloth, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned and bound the wound. Townsfolk drifted in, offering help, awkward praise. Someone slapped the sheriff on the back. Another murmured thanks to Rosa. No one quite knew what to say to Billy, the half-legend bleeding on the floor of their cantina. He understood. To most people, men like him belonged in stories told around campfires, not on their bar stools. When the room finally cleared, and Anna had been reassured that her mother and the strange outlaw were both alive, Rosa sat beside Billy on the floor, her back against the bar, exhaustion settling over her like dust. "You should rest," she said. "I will," he replied. "Soon as I can breathe without feeling like I've been kicked by a mule." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the door Caleb had fallen through. "I didn't want to kill him," she said softly. "I used to love that man. Or I loved who I thought he was." Billy turned his head to look at her. "He made his choice," he said. "You made yours. You saved my life." She gave him a sideways glance. "You saved mine first, so we're even," he said. Almost, their shoulders touched, the faintest pressure, like a promise or a farewell. Days of healing followed, slow and strangely gentle. Coulter didn't come back, not with guns, at least. Word was he'd ridden east, to court judges and governors, to plot a cleaner revenge. But something had changed in the town. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Rosa now tipped their hats. Men who had muttered about Billy in the shadows now nodded to him openly. The sheriff drank less and patrolled more. For the first time in a long while, the Cantina del Sol felt like it belonged to the people who filled it, not the man who tried to buy it. In the close, dim light of the back room, as Billy's wound knitted itself into another pale scar, he and Rosa lived in a kind of suspended world, a pocket of time, carved out of the wider story that was still moving relentlessly toward them. They cooked simple meals, shared sly smiles, argued over nothing, made love in the quiet hours when the bar was closed and the town's fears had gone to sleep. It was tender and fierce, all at once, like people who knew the world would not grant them much time and refused to waste what they had. But always, underneath that fragile peace, lay the knowledge that it could not last. One night, as the moon poured pale light through the cracked window, Billy sat on the edge of the narrow bed, pulling on his boots. Rosa watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a shadow slicing her features in half. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't bother lying. "Coulter's gone to ground," he said. "For now, but he'll be back, with papers and soldiers, instead of gun hands. When he comes, he'll bring my name with him. He'll use me to paint this town as a nest of criminals. I stay, and I make it easier for him." "So you run," she said, voice soft, but not accusing. "It's what I've always done," he replied. "Men like Coulter have the law, the telegraph, the railroad. All I've ever had is a fast horse, and the good sense to know when I'm about to be boxed in." "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "About Anna." He looked up, meeting her gaze head on. "That's why I have to go," he said. "You and Anna, you've got roots now. This town finally remembered it can stand up. You don't need a wanted man bleeding all over your floor every time some rich bastard gets his pride hurt. I stay, and sooner or later, some lawman with more backbone than this sheriff shows up to make an example of me. And when they do, they'll burn everything that touched me, including this bar." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I could come with you," she said. "I've ridden before. Anna is strong. We could start over somewhere else. A little town with no railroad plans, and no men like Coulter." Billy's fingers stilled on the bootstrap. The picture her words painted was so tempting, it almost hurt to look at. A small house under a big sky, a bar of their own, work that didn't involve counting bodies. But he saw, just as clearly, the other picture, the one made of posters nailed to walls, of deputies asking questions, of Anna learning how to ride not for fun, but to outrun a noose. "You deserve better than a life of running," he said, quietly. "So does she." Rosa stepped into the room, coming closer. "And what do you deserve?" He smiled, small and sad. "I'm not sure deserve has much to do with it anymore," he said. "Men like me, we're stories people tell when they want to scare their sons off gambling with bad company. We don't get quiet endings." "You're not just a story," she said, fiercely. "You're flesh and blood and stubbornness and kindness you hide so no one can use it against you. You're the man who came back when my daughter asked. You're the man I chose, even knowing your name was Trouble." He reached up, fingers brushing her cheek. "And you're the woman who made me wish, for the first time in a long time, that I was someone else," he said. "Someone who could sit behind a bar and argue about the price of whiskey instead of calculating how far the next town is from the last posse." She leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. "So that's it," she whispered. "We get a handful of nights, and a story no one will ever believe." "We get that," he said. "And we get something else." "What?" "We get to walk away before we destroy each other," he said, softly. "I stay, and one day, I'll have to choose between my life and this bar, or between my life and your daughter's. Or you'll have to choose between protecting me and protecting everything else you fought for. Better we make the hard choice now, while we can still look each other in the eye and not see regret." She stared at him for a long, aching moment. Then she nodded. Once, the movement sharp and clean. "I hate that you're right," she said. "Me too," he replied. "It's become a nasty habit." She laughed through her tears, then leaned down and kissed him. It was not the hungry, urgent kiss of their first night, nor the gentle one after they'd survived Coulter's attack. It was something in between, heavy with all the words neither of them could make themselves say out loud. When they broke apart, She pressed her forehead to his. "Promise me one thing," she murmured. "If you die, make it mean something. Don't let them put you in a noose, just because they can." He swallowed hard. "I'll do my best," he said. "But I'm not exactly in charge of the ending." "No," she said. "But you're in charge of what they remember. Make sure they tell the story right." At dawn, when the sky was the pale color of old paper, and the town still slept, Billy the Kid led his horse out from behind the cantina. Anna stood beside her mother on the boardwalk, hair sticking out in sleepy braids, eyes too wise for her age. "Will you come back?" she asked. Billy looked at her, at the girl who had grabbed his sleeve and dragged him into this small, fierce war. "Maybe," he said, "if the wind blows me this way again." "You better," she said, with a scowl meant to hide the tremble in her lip. "You promised to teach me how to shoot cards out of the air." "You're too young for that trick," he said, gently. "But if any man ever tries to hurt you or your mama again, you tell him you know Billy the Kid. That should scare the sense right into him." She smiled then, a quick flash of trust. Rosa stepped forward, taking Billy's hand in both of hers. "Go," she said, "before I change my mind and tie you to that post." "You'd have to catch me first," he said, lightly. But his eyes were serious. "Take care of this place, Rosa. Don't let anyone tell you it belongs to them." "It never has," she replied. "Not really. Even when I thought it belonged to Caleb, it was just waiting for me to grow a spine thick enough to claim it." "Looks to me like you've done that," he said. He swung into the saddle, the movement smooth, despite the lingering ache in his side. For a brief, suspended moment, he looked down at her. The woman with long black hair, and a face the years had only made more beautiful, standing in front of the bar her father built, the bar she had bled to keep. He memorized her like that, knowing he might need the memory on some long cold night down the trail. "Goodbye, Billy," she said. "Goodbye, Rosa," he answered. "Try not to marry any more gamblers. Try not to get yourself shot," she retorted. He laughed, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, then nudged his horse forward. As he rode out of town, the rising sun painted the Cantina del Sol in gold, catching on the windows, turning the dust in the street into a shimmer. Behind him, life would go on. Drinks poured, stories told, a little girl growing into a woman who knew her worth. Ahead of him lay deserts, and pauses, and a future that would someday write his name in history, as a villain or a myth or something in between. But somewhere, in a small town along the uncertain line of the railroad, there would always be a woman who remembered him, not as a legend, but as a man who came when her daughter cried, who stood beside her when the rich men tried to buy her soul, and who loved her just enough to leave. And maybe, he thought, as the town shrank behind him, that was the kind of story worth living, even if he wouldn't be there to hear it told. If you enjoyed riding along with Billy and Rosa in this tale of dust, danger, and impossible love, let me know your rating from 0 to 10, hit subscribe, and leave a like so we can keep bringing the Wild West to life in your imagination.